I'm Priscilla Tennant. I am the Associate Pastor for Christian Education. I'm so happy to be with you this morning. I already feel very filled up from the service we've had so far, and I'm so thankful for the leadership of the young people in our congregation. For our first reading this morning, I want to share a prayer for these times. It's by Kenneth P. Langer, and it's from the Unitarian Universalist tradition. Let me find peace within so that I may be calm throughout. Let me find silence within so that I may find compassion throughout. Let me be reminded that some things are worth waiting for. Let me be reminded that the journey is more important than reaching the destination. Let me see that the non-doing is as much a part of life as the doing. Let me be reminded that it is these moments of holding on that I can find quietude and renewal. It is within these times of inaction that I can find rest. It is in these times of emptiness that I can become full. For today's Bible reading, I want to share with you Psalm 100. And it reads, "Acclaim Yahweh with joy, all the earth. Serve Yahweh with gladness. Enter into God's presence with a joyful song. Know that Yahweh is God. Yahweh made us and we belong to the Creator. We are God's people and the sheep of God's pasture. Enter God's gates with thanksgiving and the courts with praise. Give thanks to God. Bless God's name. For Yahweh is good. God's steadfast love endures forever, and God's faithfulness to all generations." Amen. The title of my sermon is Establishing an Island of Peace Within One's Soul. I have not just one, but two Black men to thank and give attribution to for the inspiration of this sermon. One is a modern day prophet who inspires me every Monday morning on Facebook Live. The other is a deeply wise ancestor born in 1899. Starting with the modern day theologian, Reverend Brandon Rencher is a minister, organizer, writer, and trainer. He works across the US within faith, education, and nonprofit sectors. At the intersection of decolonizing church, contemplative activism, and local presence to build beloved community. As a serial innovator and church planter, Brandon's latest venture is starting the Good Neighbor movement with a team of friends and neighbors. The Good Neighbor movement is an alternative spiritual community in Greensboro, North Carolina, that is queer inclusive, multi-ethnic, and people of color led. Their primary organizing structure is a network of spiritually rooted activist groups called City Villages. City Villages are comprised of about 20 leaders and 50 neighbors who commit to living out the values of the Good Neighbor movement. Notice the message sent and the expectations set forth when a faith-based community chooses to call themselves an activist group rather than a congregation or members of a church. They consider themselves witnesses to justice in the public square. In many ways, this community has abolished church. For them, that's what it took to reimagine church, something that we often talk about as our own aim. How did they do it? Well, instead of having a brick and mortar congregation, they meet in homes, coffee shops, pubs, restaurants, outdoor, and in online platforms. The inspiration for City Village comes from the faithful witness of the African hush harbors of the antebellum period. This community has also reimagined church by only hosting public worship services quarterly during the Christian liturgical seasons of Advent, Christmas, Easter, Pentecost, and All Saints' Day. Nathan, you can take this screen share down for now. I'll have you put it back up momentarily. Their community engagement currently focuses on a community garden, healing prayer walks, neighborhood cookouts, youth events, and advocacy campaigns that impact neighbors. They welcome people that are searching for spiritual community who have struggled to find it in mainstream spaces. Their desire is to create spaces of revolutionary love and spirituality to heal what causes hate, greed, and exclusion, and to build up communities which center the flourishing of people on the edges of the church and society. The Gospel of John says that God put on flesh and moved into the neighborhood. This community is clear that there is no divide between the sacred, the secular, the profane, and the ordinary. God connects all things and people. How might this community inspire us to reimagine church? Last Monday, Brandon facilitated his weekly check-in with his friend and co-leader, minister and organizer Lauren Cunningham, on what they call the sacred pause. During this time, Brandon shared 2 quotes and posed some questions that felt like God answering a prayer of mine. Like many of us, I find myself in a strange place emotionally. I feel confused about how I feel about this moment, about myself, and about our fellow Americans as we ride the waves of turbulent current events. I'm so grateful to be able to celebrate the power of organized people to make political strides that feel like matters of life and death, even as I'm clear that those political strides are insufficient to protect us all from the deeply rooted systems of oppression fueled by white supremacist delusion, only to deal with the reality of an administration determined to discredit the election process, the very foundation of our democracy. On the one hand, I'm glad that November 20th, the Transgender Day of Remembrance, exists to honor and name people we've lost. But on the other hand, this has been the deadliest year on record for the trans community. I don't want this day to have to exist anymore. We lost 34 transgender or gender nonconforming people in the US to violent murder. This number is likely higher. Victims are still often misgendered in police statements and media reports. Being trans in this world shouldn't mean walking around with a target on your back. Yet the reality for most of our trans siblings is that it does. We must make a commitment to educating ourselves about the issues facing the trans community instead of merely reading their names from a tragic list once a year. Regarding the pandemic, I feel cautiously optimistic, like most of you, about being on the precipice of vaccines that will most likely prevent symptoms of coronavirus infection. Even as my heart breaks at the toll the virus continues to take daily, robbing people of health and life, a living wage, and human contact with those that make life worth living. I admit that I am experiencing some survivor's guilt. Some of you may feel it too. Maybe not only have you avoided illness yourself, you haven't lost anyone to the virus, nor even know anyone who's been seriously ill. Maybe your income has remained steady, your white-collar position transitioned seamlessly to working remotely, and you don't miss the old commute. Maybe some of you, like me, were able to take advantage of the low interest rates by refinancing your home, ensuring more long-term wealth for you in the future, even as our economy has lost 10 million jobs since February. In December, 12 million Americans will lose unemployment benefits. Easy for some of us to say, stop the spread, just stay home. Meanwhile, what are we doing to demand rent relief, extended unemployment, and stimulus money that will allow people to literally survive. And even if we do make a fuss by advocating for those hardest hit, what's our confidence level in the federal government's ability to provide aid for what the Bible calls the least of these, giving food to the hungry, drink to the thirsty, welcoming the stranger, and providing basic needs for those in prison, given that we can't even rely on a peaceful, cooperative transfer of power? These are profound conflicts within our souls. Yet my position of privilege does not keep me from wanting to rail at people who don't believe this infection exists, or who think they have some special immunity to either not catch it or weather the symptoms easily, and at people who refuse to wear masks or stop gathering in large groups. I want to yell at the government officials to impose a national set of restrictions that will save lives while offering economic relief to people who can no longer make ends meet, like many European countries have managed to do by now. And in the midst of all these big feelings, I turned to the Bible readings from the lectionary for today to determine what message the Spirit would have me share, only to find passages that were jubilant in their thanksgiving and praise to God, and with way more exclamation points that I had the stomach for. Instead, I wanted to find moanings and groanings, hard questions and accusations aimed at God, those expressed during the dark night of the soul. So my prayer, my lament to God was, how do you expect any spiritual leader in the midst of all this heartbreak to come up with an inspiring message to encourage the brokenhearted? I said it earlier in the pandemic, but it bears repeating. How dare I, God, try to make lemonade out of lemons at a time like this? How dare you, God? And this time, God answered me by turning my attention to Brandon and Lauren's sacred pause. And during that gathering, Brandon had the wisdom to quote Howard Thurman, the other Black theologian who gets credit for the message. Before I share more about his background and get to the quotes, I'll ask Nathan to bring up that visual aid slide where you'll see photos of both Reverend Brandon and Dr. Thurman. Howard Thurman was born and raised in Daytona, Florida. He was raised by his grandmother, who had been enslaved. In 1925, he became an ordained Baptist minister. His first pastorate at Mount Zion Baptist Church in Oberlin, Ohio, was followed by a joint appointment as professor of religion and director of religious life at Morehouse and Spelman colleges in Atlanta, Georgia. Nathan, you can take that slide down now. Thank you. Thurman spent the spring semester of 1929 studying at Haverford College with Rufus Jones, a Quaker mystic and leader of the Pacifist Interracial Fellowship of Reconciliation. Here, he began his journey towards a philosophy that stressed an activism rooted in faith, guided by spirit, and maintained in peace. It reminds me of Brandon somewhat. 3 years later, he began to articulate these views. In an essay entitled Peace, Tactics, and a Racial Minority, Thurman depicted white America as characterized by the will to dominate and control the Negro minority, a situation which engendered among Blacks a spiritually crippling hatred of their would-be dominators. Ah, yes, I admit to sometimes fighting off the feeling of spiritually crippling hatred. In 1936, Thurman led a Negro delegation of friendship to South Asia. There he met the Indian leader, Mohandas Gandhi. His conversations with Gandhi broadened his theological and international vision. In his autobiography, Thurman said that in this meeting with Gandhi, the Mahatma, which is translated Ascended Master, expressed his wish that the message of nonviolence be sent to the world by African Americans. Thurman was raised in segregated Daytona, Florida, and their schools only went to the 7th grade. So Thurman's family scraped together the funds to send him to high school in Jacksonville. However, at the train station, Thurman was told he had to pay extra to send his baggage. Buying the ticket had left him destitute, and he had no more money to ship his trunk. Penniless, the boy sat down on the steps and began to cry. And then a stranger, a Black man dressed in overalls, walked by and paid the charges. He didn't introduce himself, and Thurman never learned his name. When Thurman wrote his autobiography, he dedicated it to the stranger in the railroad station in Daytona Beach who restored my broken dream 65 years ago. And so finally, we come to the Howard Thurman quotes Brandon shared that were the answer to my prayer and the title to this sermon. I think of this pair of quotes as an appetizer and a main course. The quote to serve as our appetizer is this: there is something in every one of you that waits and listens for the sound of the genuine in yourself. It is the only true guide you will ever have. And if you cannot hear it, you will all your life spend your days on the ends of strings that somebody else pulls. Wow. And so I ask us to consider, when was the last time you heard that still, quiet voice and recognized it for what it was? The sound of the genuine in yourself. Did you dismiss it and move on to other more pressing things, or did you take it seriously? Is there an opportunity to go back and revisit it, make it right by acting upon it, taking one small step in the direction of the divine within you? Who or what has been pulling your strings, distracting you from taking steps towards your purpose? As we digest that negative wisdom, let's move on to the main course. For this quote, I've invited friends to share the quote line by line as we screen share an artistic rendering of the quote called Nigeria's Angel, with photo credit going to Ibrahim Gainu. We'll hear from Leslie, Otis, and Nyla as Nathan brings up the artistic rendering of Nigeria's Angel.
There is in every person an inward sea.
And in that sea, there is an island.
And on that island, there is an altar.
And standing guard before that altar is the angel with the flaming sword.
Nothing can get by that angel to be placed upon that altar unless it has the mark of your inner authority.
Nothing passes the angel with the flaming sword to be placed upon your altar unless it be a part of the fluid area of your consent.
This is your crucial link with the eternal.
Thank you, friends. I think that bears repeating, so I'll ask you to recite it for us just one more time.
There is in every person an inward sea.
And in that sea, there is an island.
And on that island, there is an altar.
And standing guard before that altar is the angel with the flaming sword.
Nothing can get by that angel to be placed upon that altar unless it has the mark of your inner authority.
Nothing passes the angel with the flaming sword to be placed upon your altar unless it be a part of the fluid area of your consent.
This is your crucial link with the eternal.
Thank you so much. You can stop the screen share now, Nathan. So one way to get clear about your inner authority and what should or should not get past your inner angel to be placed upon your altar is to shore yourself up with practices that ground you. Now, by this, I mean spiritual practices. I do not mean religious practices. A spiritual practice is anything that establishes an island of peace within your soul. That may mean abolishing practices that Christianity has compelled you to do, so much so that when you don't do them, you feel guilty about it. I invite you to think about, write down for yourself right now, or share using the chat feature. What practices are life-giving to you? Or not, what new ones do you want to explore? Share the practices that help you feel grounded, that link you to the eternal, that make you feel more clear about your inner authority. As you share some of your practices, I'll share some that I've witnessed in our community and even in my own home. For Margaret, it's dancing like nobody's watching and writing as often as possible. For Ovid, it's blaring the song, Dance My Pain Away, and sharing deeply insightful musings on Facebook, creating art and talking with kids. What nourishes Kip's inner angel with for friends. If you don't think some of these practices sound spiritual, I challenge you to talk to these people about how they fortify them. Find out the way these disciplines help them establish an island of peace within themselves. One of my spiritual practices has been having 1-hour video calls with a group of friends every other day. It's surely a spiritual practice. For Linda, it's connecting with young people, gardening and singing. For Michelle Williams, it's been sewing face masks to offer protection to her family members. For my husband, Aaron, it's long walks, which he claims are for the dog, but I know better. For one of my daughters, Anaya, it's tarot cards and creative expressions like painting and embroidering. For my other daughter, Pelham, it's watching anime with or without friends and drawing. For our mother, Lori, her most spiritual of practices includes laughing out loud on the phone with friends and family, bonding outdoors around a warm bonfire, and fawning over photos of baby Skylar, the child of her nephew who she so badly wants to hold. I have some more questions for you to consider. And once again, you're invited to share replies in the chat if you feel inclined. What are you abolishing or wanting to abolish? For me, it's mainstream media propaganda, taking breaks from social media, and trying to reduce multitasking so that I can be more present. What is it for you? What community engagement practices do you want to explore? Practices that work towards justice and liberation for all. Finally, who helps you be accountable? Because we shouldn't do this alone. Think about the commitments you might want to make so that you don't spend your days on the ends of strings being pulled by someone else. I will close us out with the words of Dr. Howard Thurman, our wise ancestor, who reminds us that no one is ever free from the peculiar pressures of their own life. Each one has to deal with evil aspects of life, with injustices inflicted upon her, him, them, and injustices we wittingly or unwittingly inflict upon others. We are all of us deeply involved in the throes of our own weaknesses and strengths, expressed often in the profoundest conflicts within our souls. The only hope for Storcies, the only possibility of stability for the person, is to establish an island of peace within one's soul. Here, what one really thinks and feels about one's own life stands revealed. What one really thinks and feels about people far and near is seen with every nuance honestly labeled. Love is love. Hate is hate. Fear is fear. Well within the island is the temple where God dwells, not the God of the creed, the church, the family, but the God of one's heart. What a person is, what their plans are, what their authentic point is, where your life goes, all is available to you in the presence with a capital P. Thurman said, how foolish it is, how terrible if you have not found your island of peace within your own soul. It means that you are living without discovery of your true home. There is in every person an inward sea, and in that sea there is an island. And on that island there is an altar. And standing God before that altar is the angel with the flaming sword, the one we saw. Nothing can get by that angel to be placed upon that altar unless it has the mark of your inner authority. Nothing passes the angel with the flaming sword to be placed upon your altar unless it be part of the fluid area of your consent. This is your crucial link with the eternal. This is the good news of God. Amen.